over to you, Denise.
Okay. Next slide. Hello, everyone. This is Denise Gamache from the Better Women's Justice Project. I just wanted to give you a quick note on the history of development of a tool that accompanies this webinar and that will give you further information after the information that you get today. We were fortunate in the last couple of years to have been involved in a collaborative project with Peaceful Families Project in New Jersey and the Asian and Pacific Islander Institute on Domestic Violence to produce this a guide called the Islamic on Islamic Marriage Contracts, a resource guide for legal professionals, advocates, imams, and communities. And the chief author of that was from the Peaceful Families Project, Mahr al-Khatib. And so the guide itself will give you a lot of good background information that will be reinforced by the information you hear today. And so we'll get right on to hearing our content experts today, Abid Awan and Chick Dabi. So, and I think, Chick, you're leading us off, right?
Yes. So thank you, everybody, for joining this webinar and for your interest in this topic. I work at the Asian and Pacific Islander Institute on Domestic Violence. We are a national resource center, just like Battered Women's Justice Project. So neither of our programs provide direct services, but we provide training and technical assistance for direct service providers like yourselves. You might be wondering why the Asian Pacific Islander Institute is addressing domestic violence in Muslim communities. The reason for that is because we have an expansive definition of Asia, and Asia includes West Asia, which is typically referred to as the Middle East. So that's the reason why we include Asians in our, addressing domestic violence in Muslim communities in our sort of charter. And the other reason is, of course, that there are many Asian countries have large and significant Muslim populations. In fact, 1 in 5 Muslims in the U.S. identify as being from Asia. I also want to comment on the collaboration between the 3 agencies, Peaceful Families Project, Battered Women's Justice Project, and the API Institute, and why we decided to go ahead and develop the Islamic Marriage Contracts Resource Guide, because what we were seeing in our work with constituents and advocates in the field was that there was quite a bit of confusion about understanding whether, the religious marriage or the legal civil marriage, etc., and so religious marriages and divorces and civil marriage and divorce, and that these confusions were partly created also or manipulated by abusers to as a form of abuse, so that they could diminish women's understanding of their situations and isolate them as well. So there was a lot of misinformation, and so we wanted to develop this guide to dispel some of that confusion and to also then arm ourselves and prepare ourselves to, as we work with Muslim women, about how marriage and divorce is being used by abusers and how we can sort of counteract that trend. So getting started here, who are American Muslims in the U.S.? Estimated 3 to 7 million Muslims. There have been waves of migration. So in the late 1800s, they came from the Middle East. In the 60s, they came from South Asia, which is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, which have, again, very significant Muslim populations. They came from West Asia, which is the Middle East. And then in the 90s, they came from the Balkans as a result of the wars there. And again, Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, which includes countries like Indonesia. Practices in Muslim homes vary a lot. The way Islam is practiced differs. The interpretations of it differ. Not everybody observes to the same degree. Some Muslims don't observe at all. So it's really not just a religious identity, but it's also a cultural identity. and just like any identity that we have here. And again, because we're going to be talking about Islamic marriage contracts, we just want to emphasize that like the majority of Americans, Muslims will also choose to solemnize their marriages with a religious minister. I just want to add a couple of additional demographic points of information. So 35% of Muslims in the U.S. self-identify as African American. So they're sometimes referred to as indigenous Muslims, so they're from here. And then the Muslims that come from the Middle East and come from outside the U.S. are sometimes differentiated by being called immigrant Muslims. And just additional clarifications, not all Arabs are Muslims. In fact, I think something around 30+% of Arabs are Muslims, but there are a lot of them are Christians and Jews and Druze, and then there are a lot of different branches of Christianity. So again, the identity is very complex and shouldn't be oversimplified in our work as advocates. Okay. The other thing that we wanted to emphasize in developing the Islamic marriage contracts was to really dispel some of the notions that Islam somehow is intrinsically denies women equal rights, and in fact actually really tries to enshrine women's equality. And if you look at the context of 7th century CE, when Islam developed in Arabia, at the time it was called Arabia, then you see what how the context of even 7th century developments and in Islam are around ensuring that women's rights get equal status. So I think over the years, over the centuries, of course, that progress has been marching forward. And although there are some countries that adhere to a very conservative interpretation of Islam around women's rights and women's value, that's true in any country, in any religion. Everywhere there are degrees of belief and ideology about the importance of women's contribution to the social good. So I just wanted to emphasize that many rights were granted to women in the 7th century that were not that weren't present in the historical context. These included the rights to vote, to own property, to inherit, to work, the right to sexual satisfaction, the right to consent to a marriage. And since then, since 7th century CE, there have been Muslim women jurists and historians and all kinds of professionals in the field that have been women. In the present day, there are many Muslim scholars who are women. I'd just like to point out somebody of the stature of Aziza al-Hibri, who has made significant contributions to Islamic jurisprudence from a framework of Muslim women's rights. And so in addition, the rights that Islam enshrines are the legal capacity to contract, to inherit and bequeath property. Women cannot be inherited in a will, and they can own, manage, and dispose of property. So again, in the historical context, these are very important rights. So having talked about the rights and equality, I'm going to just say something about domestic violence, because that shows up inequalities in gender relationships. So what's the prevalence of domestic violence in Muslim communities? There have been a couple of surveys that have been done, and most recently by Peaceful Families Project, which is where this data comes from. 31% of Muslim women report domestic violence in their lifetime, so that's the prevalence rate. As you can see, emotional violence is the highest. 45% experience emotional violence, 31% report physical, 16% of women report financial abuse, and 15% sexual violence. Other types of abuse that women described was spiritual, related to their beliefs, making threats to her reputation, immigration status-related abuse, where batterers threaten deportation, loss of contact with children, etc. So of course, children are used in the abuse and as part of the threats. And then threats to harm family members, and this can be family members who are here in the U.S. And more often these are family members who are in the home countries, and it's harder to find legal recourses to protect them, and the threats are much too vague. So that's some of the constellation of abuse. Some of the trends that we see, particularly amongst Muslim populations, but also in others, is the issue of abandonment. And we'll be talking a little more about that. Forced marriages, the way the Mahr, which is the gift from the husband to the wife at marriage, is appropriated, and some unilateral divorces. But again, I want to emphasize that trends are not only confined to Muslim communities, but really occur in all different communities with different degrees of expression. And as we all know, domestic violence is different from couples conflict. It's distinct. All couples have conflict and experience conflict. It's not all domestic violence. And Islam, in its attempt to enshrine women's equality, has clearly, recommends multi-step processes with mutual consultation and open discussion between husband and wife to resolve conflicts. And so really promotes very actively an attempt to resolution and harmony in the home based on the equality of both partners. So here again, I just want to mention that we have advocates like Sharifa Al-Khatib, the late Sharifa Al-Khatib, who did an immense amount of work to raise awareness about domestic violence in Muslim communities, give voice to survivors of domestic violence in the community, and really raise the field's awareness about the important needs that had to be met. And I also want to give props to activists like Daisy Khan in New York, where activists like her have set up WISE, which is Women's Initiative for Spirituality and Equality. And activists like that keep up the dialogue about gender equality and really work, again, on a national and sometimes also international basis.
Chick?
Yeah.
This is Denise. Could I stop you for 1 sec?
Yes.
Before you move on, because there's just a couple questions, people asking for clarification. The statistics that you're talking about, are they referring primarily to women victims?
Yes.
Okay. And then would you also provide an example of spiritual abuse?
Abid, do you want to provide an example?
An example of spiritual abuse, I'll give you examples that happen in my practice on a regular basis. I have a woman, 3-year, 4-year marriage, 2 children, comes to my office. Her husband and her started a business together. She helped him with the business. She comes to the office and says, look, things are not working out. He's abusing me. I want to get a divorce. But he's telling me that under my religious precepts, I'm not entitled to share in the joint marital estate. I'm not entitled to obtain any other financial support in way of maintenance or alimony. So the spiritual abuse comes into play with this demented, one-sided interpretation of Islamic family law and make the victim feel responsible and feel that she is not complying with the precepts and restrictions of her own religion. And that is a way of abusing and controlling women in the process of divorce or even in the process during the marriage. So spiritual abuse takes on the form of using certain interpretations of religion to justify control and abuse committed by the husband.
Great, thank you.
Okay, actually just wanted to find out how many people who are on the, how many people here work with Muslim women? And we can just, see what the responses are, but we can also keep going. All right. So Abid, can you go ahead and start the introduction?
Yeah. Now, we're trying to prepare a context to the domestic violence that can take place in Muslim communities, utilizing the cultural specificity of Muslims, mainly their religious system, their religious laws, and their culture. So I'm going to try to provide a context. Some of this could be a little bit technical, but overall, when you understand the context, as the lecture continues, we'll get into the specifics and how this actually applies to helping you advocate and protect and empower Muslim women. Sharia has become the boogeyman in the United States right now. The religious right has taken on the concept of Sharia as the next existential threat or mortal threat to our society and to our culture. The reason of this movement is politicization that attempts to marginalize the Muslim community. So I want to try to explain what Sharia really is and how it functions and how it is relevant and important to many Muslims, regardless of the religiosity that Muslims comply with. There are Muslims that are extremely religious and follow the dietary restrictions, but there are Muslims that don't. And there's a lot in between. Sharia literally is more than the law in the prescriptive sense that we understand as Western lawyers. It's a methodology, a process to construct divine meaning, to ascertain divine will. So as a methodology and a process, it's more than black and white. It's not simply this is what the law is. It's much more fluid, flexible, and there is no central authority to determine what Sharia is or what the law is. Islamic law, specifically in the Sunni tradition, has no monopoly over divine will, and that's why there's so many different schools of law and different perspectives developed around the Muslim world. It is a legal system based on the two primary foundational texts, the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet, which are called the Sunnah, the sayings of the Prophet, the things that he agreed with, he disagreed with, or how he conducted his own personal life. So that is the overarching message of Sharia is moral in the end. So it is this moral and legal anchor that runs a Muslim's moral compass or defines his moral compass. Everything from the way you marry to dissolve your marriages, the way you eat, the way you treat animals, you protect the environment, commercial trade, your relationship with your elders, the fairness, social responsibility, everything about your being to please God, not fear God, but please God by doing the right thing, comes under the rubric of Sharia. So it's very diverse and very expansive. And with that, it means that there is a variety or a diversity on the role of Sharia in your personal life as a Muslim. So, for example, in the domestic violence realm, the majority of Muslims marry and have their marriages solemnized by an imam. Divorce and dissolution of marriage to a Muslim couple is more than simply a legal dissolution of a partnership. It's also a ethical and moral issue for a Muslim. Because even though you may not have a final judgment of divorce from the state of California and you're legally divorced, religiously you're divorced if your husband announced and told you that he no longer wants to remain in this relationship and dissolves it. So you personally feel you're already divorced. Whether you have a legal divorce or not, you're divorced. So there's a moral aspect of the dissolution of marriage to the victims of domestic violence that we must appreciate and understand. And we'll talk about that further down on some examples of how religious divorces are utilized as a way to extract better financial outcome for a husband in the divorce process.
Okay, so let's move on to marriage.
In Islamic law, marriage is viewed as a civil contract, and it's as you can see from the slide, it's much more than simply a commercial relationship. It is a relationship built on gender equality and requiring the parties to be part of a partnership. But as a civil marriage contract, the bride and the groom must reach a certain age of majority. In most Arab countries today, in Muslim countries, while in the pre-modern times the age of consent and the age of majority differed. In 1937 in the United States, the age of consent was 13. But today, in most Muslim countries, the age is 18 and above. And only with court orders are you able to have marriages that are under that particular age. There needs to be an offer of marriage, an acceptance of marriage, and currently there is a requirement for the signing of a contract, but in pre-modern times, marriages were also, in many circumstances, oral contracts. 2 witnesses are required, but here for a technical issue is in Sunni law and Shi'i law differ. While Sunni law does not require witnesses for the dissolution of the marriage, Shi'i law requires witnesses to the dissolution. Sunni law requires 2 witnesses for a marriage to be valid. Shi'i law does not require witnesses for the marriage to be valid. When we're looking at marriages in the United States that are related to the community, the laws here differ from marriage taking place in a Muslim country and marriage taking place in the United States. Next slide. Now, as a civil contract, now we have to keep in mind that the default law may come across from a modern perspective in pre-modern Islamic family law as not equitable to women based on what we understand your marital financial rights are today under U.S. law. But the marriage contract has been utilized by women throughout Islamic history as a tool to empower and to control their own financial and marital destiny, and have their husbands comply with what they want and have something enforceable to protect them in a court of law. So the marriage contract has taken on aspects where women would include issues regarding finances, issues regarding the marital domicile, that you can't, I want to stay around in my neighborhood and where my family is, you can't uproot me, marry me today and then move 6 hours away. Issue regarding children and rearing and their financial responsibilities. I had a Muslim marriage contract once with a woman where she specifically included that, listen, I'm a school teacher and I've been earmarking 20% of my income from my school to help support my parents. You understand this, and this shall continue even when we are married. And that was specifically written in her marriage contract. Issues regarding the dissolution of marriage. We always hear that a husband has a unilateral at-will right to dissolve a marital relationship. That being said, many women also include in their contract that same provision to allow them to have the unilateral at-will right to dissolve the marital relationship. And you see more and more empowered women including that provision. The contract also includes that you can't prevent me from getting a job. You can't prevent me from going to school. There's issues regarding domestic chores and so forth. And specifically on monogamy, a lot of women would include that this is going to be a monogamous marriage. You're not entitled to have a second wife. And if you do select to do that, then I'm automatically entitled to my divorce and all the financial rights and privileges arising from your breach of the contract. In a Muslim marriage contract, every Muslim marriage contract includes a provision that's called Mahr, M-A-H-R, sometimes called Sadak, S-A-D-A-K. And this provision is a development from pre-modern, pre-Islamic times, where a certain amount of money is given to the bride. In other words, this is money that is not paid to the parents of the bride. This is money that is due to the bride at the time of the marriage. It is a gift that the husband, or at the time before they marry, she's entitled to ask for that money prior to the consummation of the marriage. It's not a dowry in the Western sense. It's not a bride price. It's a consequence of the marriage contract. And one very interesting point about historical context is that under Western law, up until the 19th century, we had these concepts that's called coverture, and the fusion of the identity of the wife with that identity of the husband. And because it becomes the identity of the husband, the wife did not have legal capacity to enter into contracts, own property, and so forth without the permission of the husband. That concept never existed in Islamic law. So a woman always had legal capacity to own, manage, and dispose of her property without the consent of her husband or male relatives. Also, Mahr as an effect of the marriage, it's not consideration. In other words, consideration is a technical legal term saying that you need to have consideration for a contract to be valid. But under Islamic law, if the parties did not agree on the amount of the mahr can be any type of property. Generally, it's either, gold coins or, a dollar figure. And it's divided into two parts, whether it's an immediate part and a part of it will be postponed. So let's say it'll be $101 mahr, $1 advanced and 100,000 deferred. And the due date of that deferred amount would be the dissolution of the marriage or the death of the husband. So in this particular circumstance, there is an agreement on the amount. If the parties never agreed, it's implied by law in the contract. It's called Mahr al-Mithil, the proper mahr for a woman of the same socioeconomic and educational class. So given that it's implied by law, it's not really consideration for the validity of the contract. In many of the Muslim countries, they include that this amount of money that's due from the husband to the wife is a preferential debt, automatically attaches to his estate. And it's the separate property of the wife. She is not required to use it for her own maintenance, for the maintenance of her children. It's her money to be saved and invested. And the husband has no legal or equitable claim to it. And it's separate from the wife's rights to inheritance and to alimony. While under Islamic law, the concept of alimony that we have today in the West, which includes different types of alimony from short-term to limited duration to permanent alimony, under Islamic law, the alimony really ranged from 3 months up to a year. It's support during a period of time while the wife is waiting in her waiting period, waiting to see if the divorce is going to finalize. And if she's pregnant, the support continues until she delivers. Now, in most Arab countries, Morocco, Egypt, and Pakistan, there are reforms and there are laws that are allowing women longer duration alimony and other financial support that did not exist in some of the pre-modern legal texts. As to polygamy, obviously a polygamous marriage is not legal or recognized in the U.S. Polygamy is a very rare circumstance in most Muslim societies. Yes, it is permitted, but there is authority in the pre-modern classical text that the preference is monogamy over polygamy, and there were socio-economic circumstances for polygamy in pre-modern times that no longer exist today. Even the restrictions of treating your wives equally, financially and emotionally, some interpretations say that in particular verse makes it a rhetorical presumption that you are not able to be equal and fair to all wives, therefore it should be a monogamous marriage. Now, an Islamic marriage that is not registered in civil courts is legal in some states and illegal in other states. And I'm going to go through some of these examples because this is very, very important for women that are subject to abuse and domestic violence. I have this in my office all the time where husbands would marry them only religiously, never register their marriage, and use that against them so that they're not entitled to a divorce or all the financial rights that come with the divorce. And I'm going to give some practice tips of how to get around those issues. Now, property rights under Islamic law for women, there's a very interesting book called Divorce, Marriage, and Property Settlement in Pre-Modern Egyptian Society, 15th century, I believe, or 14th century. It's a book by a scholar out of Princeton University. His name is Rappaport. And in that book, he went through court records and historical research, and he demonstrated that when women were getting divorced in the 14 and 1500s, it was a financial devastation to husbands, not the other way around, because women were entitled during that period of time to obtain their postponed dower, and that Mahr in pre-modern times was a sufficient amount of money to help a woman proceed and take care of herself and have some financial independence. Moreover, the stratification of society in a extended family setting where the extended family was the social security, the extended family was the way for you to protect yourself. A woman went back to her extended family and went back with some financial strength. Also, because the Islamic inheritance system is a fixed share system that devolves wealth by operation of law, and you cannot deviate from this devolution of wealth at death, women were always coming with inheritance, receiving bequest, receiving property. So husbands would take loans from their wives. So at the time of the divorce, not only did they have to pay their dower, but they also had to pay her back any money they owed. And the support that he's responsible for all the way through the time of divorce, including the child support and the custody amount of money that the wife is entitled for. She's entitled for support to raise and rear his children. So these type of rights existed in pre-modern times. And the one concept that did not exist is what we call marital assets under U.S. law. Our position under U.S. law is that all assets acquired during the marriage are part of the marital economic enterprise. They're marital, they're joint, they're to be equitably distributed between the parties. Now, under Islamic law, each party maintains the property that is titled in his name. If property is jointly titled, then it'll be split 50-50. If it is not jointly titled, the title owner keeps 100%. However, there's many classical texts that would allow us to look at economic partnership and enterprise theories that would apply to women who've participated and helped their husbands in their businesses, worked in the garden, worked in the farm, that she would be entitled at the very minimum a percentage of that property or compensation for all of the work that she has provided.
So Abid, you've given us a good outline about the economic and social spheres in the marriage, and can we move to divorce?
Yes. There are three primary ways to dissolve marital relationships under Islamic law. The talaq, which is the husband's unilateral at-will right to dissolve the marital relationship without cause. Upon his dissolution, all of the financial rights and privileges that he owes become due. The second way is judicial divorce. And in judicial divorce, either husband or wife are entitled to make an application to the court to dissolve their marriage. And that has to be based on grounds: abuse, cruelty, failure to have sexual relations on both sides, whether the husband is not having sexual access, which is under U.S. law sexual desertion, or whether the wife is not having sexual access and she has a desertion claim. The third way is a mutual divorce, which is primarily a khula', which is a wife's right to seek the divorce with the consent of the husband. Now, these three different ways of divorce have different financial consequences. On the talaq, all of the husband's responsibilities become due. On the judicial divorce, depending on fault, the courts may apportion financial rights. In the khulu' dissolution and mutual dissolution, generally the wife compensates the husband financially by waiving certain rights in order to obtain his consent. In this particular area is where you see most of the abuse when it comes to religious divorces. In other words, I have clients that come here all the time, and she says, I want a religious divorce. Husband refuses. He keeps giving her a hard time, makes her life difficult, screams at her, ignores her, doesn't have sexual relations with her, doesn't maintain. He wants to make her life a living hell so that she proceeds and asks for the divorce based on this khulu' theory so that he doesn't have to pay the postponed dower or any financial rights. So this is an area where you can see a lot of abuse. Egypt in 2001 decided to make it an automatic divorce if the wife waives her postponed dower.
Just wanted to interject here about a trend that we also see that many advocates are noticing. And again, this is not confined to Muslim communities, but many Asian groups. It's the trend referred to as marry and dump, where men might marry somebody either from the home country or who they know here in the U.S., and then they abandon them very quickly after the marriage. So the new wife can be abandoned within 3 months, or even immediately after the marriage, she's left abandoned overseas. He promises to come back and get all the paperwork done, but he doesn't, and then he's untraceable, hasn't given correct information for address, etc. The other way that the dumping also happens in the U.S., so couples who come here after marriage and within a few months he is asking for a divorce, and she's completely baffled and trying to contest it or find out what she can do, but she has very few rights. And she also gets a lot of pressure from her family to stay and to try and make the marriage work. Then you can also have where the divorce is filed overseas or where the divorce is filed in the U.S. So these are just some of the trends that we're seeing.
Absolutely, and examples of the abandonment. I had a case, she marries from Egypt, her whole family, she has nothing in New Jersey, she travels to New Jersey, she gets pregnant on the wedding night, and the abuse starts. She ends up delivering a child, and now she has nothing, no green card, no legal status here. She wants to go home back to Egypt where her entire family and her job is, and she's prevented. Court won't let her because now there's a child, and now the husband is not agreeing. So it's you bring them here, and their destiny becomes fixated to a country that's foreign to them, and they don't have many options. The consequences of divorce, as we spoke about the financial rights on Mahr, and all of this is under the Islamic legal system, and this is pre-modern. We're just going to look at how parts of what I've just discussed thus far come into play in a U.S. court setting. The waiting period is a 3-month period, 3 menstrual cycles that you need to wait before a divorce can become final, to allow the parties a cooling down period to make sure that the wife is not pregnant, and so forth and so on. Custody issue we'll discuss in a little while, and let's go to the next. The abuse connected to Mahr, I just explained, is the khulu' setting where the husband refuses to pay and try to blame the dissolution of the marriage on the spouse and asking that she must forfeit her financial Mahr rights. Now, under Islamic law, custody is different than our concept of custody in the United States. Custody under Islamic law is composed of 3 layers of guardianship. You have what's called guardianship for rearing purposes, and guardianship over the child's property, and guardianship over the child's person. The guardianship over rearing is an age-specific, gender-specific criteria which favors the maternal and female line. So it's similar to the contender year doctrine that we used to have in the United States, is that the custody, there's a presumption it's in the best interest of the child to be with his mother. And this law has been codified in most Middle Eastern and Muslim countries where rearing and physical custody of the child goes with the mother. Many Middle Eastern and Muslim countries, Egypt, for example, raised this age to 15. Jordan raised it to 15. I think Syria is following suit. Even in Hanbali schools like in Abu Dhabi, in Qatar, they're raising the age and they're allowing the child at the reaching of a certain age to decide if he wants to stay with his mother or go with his father. As it pertains to the guardianship of the child's property and person, it's with the father from birth to emancipation. And that is a little bit problematic, even though it overlaps a little bit with the mother's physical custody. But again, from a U.S. court setting, the law of the land is the best interest of the child. These concepts of custody only come into play when we're looking at foreign custody decrees that we're asking the courts to recognize. Foreign custody decrees are, in the Middle East, complicated. If they are not utilizing the best interest of the child, they're usually not recognized. And hopefully we'll have enough time to finish the slides. There's a couple of cases that summarize the state of the law as it pertains to this area. How this is used in an abuse context. I've had this in many cases with religious Muslims, where even though the issue is about best interest, but the parties are engaged in negotiations to settle their case. So they're not presenting their case before a court to make the decision based on evaluation. The wear and tear of litigation and all of the problems that come with the costs associated with the contested custody litigation. So the husband initiates by going to the imam and saying, look, we're Muslim and we want to just govern our lives based on Islam and based on the traditional pre-modern concept of custody. So they use this to make the wife and mother feel guilty and feel that she has an obligation to give up custody of the child at a certain age. And not the new laws at the age of 15, but looking at the ages of 7 to 9 for a child, for a boy. Or saying that if you remarry, you lose custody. Because that's one of these concepts under pre-modern time, and there is a reason for it, and a justifiable reason in pre-modern times. If a wife remarries, that the custody was shipped to the father. You've got to look at the extended family system, the tribal context. These children are part of a family. It's the marriage, even marriage, is not a marriage between two individuals. It's a fusion of two families. It means something different than what we understand today in modernity and urbanization and the nuclear family. But they use this pre-modern time concepts that don't apply today to try to force her to give up her rights to custody. And I have this all the time in many of my contested custody cases with devout Muslims. And parental abduction issues, that's something that we face quite regularly in countries that involve Islamic law and so forth. But the laws in many of these Muslim countries are starting to shift. For example, Morocco just acceded to the Hague Convention for the Civil Aspects of International Child Abduction. The U.S. has not accepted their accession, but there is movement around. Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates, for example, is using the best interest standard now in awarding custody. So there are shifts that are going on around the Muslim world. Now, the relevance of a lot of what I just said, part of it is relevant in many court settings in the U.S. For example, is a Muslim marriage contract enforceable under state law? Is a foreign divorce decree from a Muslim contract, from a Muslim country recognized? If there's a jurisdictional conflict, what do we do? If there's a Muslim marriage in America, is it legal? Is it void or voidable? How about if there's remarriage? How do we deal with foreign divorce decrees? These are areas, next, Islamic law, customs, and traditions have routinely surfaced in court, and they're litigated in American courts. I've handled probably anywhere between 100 cases over my career that involved a component of the laws of the Middle East or Islamic law. So and they revolve around religious rearing, recognition of foreign judgments, whether divorce, marriage, or custody, and the enforcement of the Muslim marriage contract. And we're going to go into some examples now in the next 15 minutes, try to cover a lot. Now, the one thing that I want to make very clear to all of you listeners is that a Muslim marriage contract has nothing to do with prenuptial agreements. Prenuptial agreements are a product of the 20th century. In California prior to the 1970s and many other states considered prenuptial agreements facilitating divorce and contrary to public policy. So 7th century Muslim marriage contract could not have anticipated prenuptial agreements that we understand today in the 21st century. Prenuptial agreements are estate planning tools. They resolve the financial rights and privileges between two individuals in the event of divorce and the event of death. And we know that under Islamic law, you cannot disinherit your wife, cannot disinherit anybody that's under that fixed share system. So the law around the country has revolved around whether a Muslim marriage contract is a prenup or it's a simple contract. Some cases have enforced the Muslim marriage contract as a prenup. A couple of cases, one case in Florida, Akile, found that this is a Muslim prenuptial agreement. The problem is that the majority of jurisdictions around the country have adopted the Premarital Agreement Act, or the jurisprudence and principles of that act have been incorporated in the case law in many states, which stand for the proposition, at the very minimum, for a prenuptial agreement to be valid, there needs to be advice of counsel and full and complete financial disclosures. 99% that never happens in a Muslim marriage. It's a first marriage, you're young, you have nothing to be worried about protecting. So if you take the position that it's a prenup, more and more courts are going to find that it does not comply with the basic requirements of state law for an enforceable and valid prenuptial agreement. So Muslim women are going to be disadvantaged. Moreover, many husbands are trying to utilize the prenuptial agreement aspect or theory of a marriage contract to foreclose a wife's rights to alimony, equitable distribution, and all of her other financial rights under state law. So it's a double whammy. You'll have a problem that if a wife wants it enforced, she may not be able to because it doesn't comply. And if it does comply, it may allow husbands to get away in long-term marriages with wives forfeiting most of their financial rights. So the better approach to look at a Muslim marriage contract for purposes of validity and enforceability in an American court setting is to look at it as a simple contract. There's an offer, there's acceptance, the parties performed. As long as there are no fraud, misrepresentation, undue pressure, and so forth, then it will be enforceable, and it will protect women in the sense that they will have their right to the Mahr, but they do not foreclose all their rights under state law. Next. So here now we have some cases. I'm going to skip the cases because I think I summarized it. I'm going to go to the next, keep going, religious marriages. Now, this is a very strong area in domestic abuse. Under the U.S. law, when you are taking an intake of a domestic violence and you want to know where they got, you need to ask the question, where did you get married? And did you obtain a marriage license? There are two jurisdictions in the United States. There's a jurisdiction, I'm going to use New York and New Jersey. New York takes a position that even if you do not obtain a marriage license, as long as you married in the state of New York, based on your religious requirements, and a person authorized by your religion solemnized your marriage, we're going to recognize your marriage as valid. All rights and privileges there to arise, just like if you had a marriage license. Because they view the absence of the marriage license as rendering the contract voidable, not void. Then you have New Jersey. New Jersey takes a position, if you do not have a marriage license, we don't care how many marriage contracts you sign. We don't care how many people came to your wedding. We don't care if it was, the head of Azhar who solemnized your marriage. Your marriage is void, no rights. So here is where the confusion on religious marriages. Religious marriages are valid in almost every state of this union as long as you obtained a marriage license, but not in the circumstance if you did not obtain a marriage license, and that's where the difference on validity and invalidity. In the cases where you did not obtain a marriage license in New Jersey, your only cause of action is a cause of action that we call palimony. You would need to prove in a written document, which would be your Muslim marriage contract, that the husband promised to take care of you for life, and you relied on that promise, lived with him, cohabited with him, and now he breached that contract and you are damaged as a result. And you make it's a breach of contract claim, and you'll be entitled to a lump sum compensation for your losses and division of property that may be considered a partnership based on a theory of a trust theory of some sort. So this is the general issue on marriage licenses. Now, in some very few states like New York, there was this case where a husband came from New York to New Jersey, asked for her hand from her parents, brought with him an imam from New York, and they solemnized the marriage in New Jersey. They had a wedding, moved into the marital domicile in New York, never obtained a marriage license from the state of New Jersey. He drops dead. This was his second marriage. His kids file in surrogate court saying, we're the only surviving heirs. Our father was never married legally. So the issue turned on which law governs, the law where the marriage took place or the law where the case was pending. In the majority of jurisdictions, the place where you marry is the law that would govern the validity of your marriage. But New York took another position. It said there are two options. Option one is the place where you got married. Option two is the matrimonial domicile. Also has an interest in determining the validity because it's a public policy in favor of validity of marriages, so we will pick the jurisdiction that would validate. So in that particular case, the wife did prevail. But as you can see, where you get married is very technical. Now, where you, if you marry religiously in a foreign country, as long as it is legal in the foreign country, it will be legal in state of New Jersey, state of California, as long as it's not contrary to public policy. The same also applies to issues relating to divorces. In the issues relating to divorces, religious divorces alone in the United States are not recognized. Religious divorces that are legal in the country of origin are recognized, as long as they don't violate our public policy. Do we have any more time or start for questions?
I think you can just take a few more minutes to finish the issue of religious divorce and maybe the foreign divorce.
Yeah. So now on the religious divorces, many husbands, what they do for purposes of abuse, again, because we're trying to context this on abuse. I had many cases, recent case, husband says, honey, I'm going to take you to see your parents in Jordan. You haven't seen them for a long time. Surprised. She's saying, well, I'm going to go see my parents. She gets on a plane, goes to Jordan. She's in the hotel room. She gets served with a complaint for divorce because the husband goes to the court in Jordan and serves and obtains a divorce. Then comes back to New Jersey and hoping that the court will recognize this particular divorce. In those circumstances, the advice that you need to do, and this is very, very technical and very important, you always tell the woman, do not participate in the proceeding in the foreign country. Immediately retain local counsel in the United States and have them file an application in front of the court, let them know what's going on in the foreign country, and ask the judge to stop them from proceeding. And it will always work. Problem happens is that if the wife retains counsel in the foreign country, participates in the proceeding, there is enough to argue that she submitted to the jurisdiction of that foreign location and foreign court, and now she can't get out of it. So you have to be very careful on the participation of the victim in the proceedings in the foreign country. Now, foreign divorces of that nature, if they are brought to the United States to be recognized, we have a concept that's called comity. Comity is a concept where American courts, out of respect for international foreign affairs and the international community, discretionary for us to say, well, I'm going to review this judgment that was issued in the foreign country, and if I find it doesn't offend our public policy, if I find its procedures were fair, I will recognize it. I'm not obligated to recognize it. It's not full faith and credit between New York and Minnesota. It's comity, discretionary. So the divorces that are issued from foreign countries, they, in a lot of circumstances, there may be no due process, no notice. The financial rights were not really adjudicated. It only dissolved the marriage, but it did not make a ruling on custody, child support, alimony, and so forth. So those are the issues where foreign divorces, if they don't have these other requirements, they're not going to be recognized in the state. Now, the other times that they are recognized is when there is a matrimonial domicile in the foreign country, or there is a residency. For example, some people would be living, in San Francisco, and then they relocate for 2 years in Saudi Arabia. In that circumstance, an argument can be made that Saudi Arabia, at this point, those courts have vested interest in the case because of the residency of the parties. So these are some of the areas that relate to divorces, foreign divorces, and their recognition. But clearly, a religious divorce in the United States will not dissolve your marriage.
Okay. Shall we go to questions?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions?
There's a series of questions. Yeah, that's okay. I can read them to you. There's a series of questions in this last section here, and I'll sort of go through them from the most recent backwards. How do you stop divorces when a husband goes overseas and puts an ad in the newspaper that I am divorcing this woman, who is his wife and is in the U.S., and because she never shows up to court, the courts give him the divorce?
That divorce would not be recognized in a U.S. court setting. And what she would need to do is immediately retain local counsel and file a divorce in the U.S. That only could while that divorce may be legal in Jordan or in the foreign country, that only dissolves her marriage religiously. Does not impact the financial rights that she has. She still, as long as she is a resident in the United States, she will be able to go to a court and file for divorce. And that divorce will have no impact on her.
Okay, the next question is, could you please elaborate on the effect of a wife-initiated divorce on the Mahr, especially when there is domestic violence?
In that circumstance, I'm going to give you an example of how I dealt with it. I had a client that comes to me and says, look, I'm devout Muslim. I married this guy, and he's not compliant with the religion, and he's forcing me to do things I don't want to do. He wants me to go out to parties. He wants me to drink alcohol. I don't drink alcohol. He made my life miserable. I want out of this divorce. So I filed a complaint for divorce based on grounds that he abused her, he mistreated her, and he misrepresented certain things before they got married. So we went to the local imam. And the local imam says, well, why doesn't she just do a khulur? I said, but Imam, I'm asking for the $50,000 postponed dower. I'm not going to waive that $50,000. So the imams are always looking for the easy way out. Just waive it and let's just get you the divorce. I said, Imam, I am here not based on khulur. I'm making an application before you for dissolution based on grounds. He caused harm to my client. Here is the cases from pre-modern text and from modern text. My client is entitled to a divorce because of the fault of the husband. When she is vindicated on that fault, she's entitled 100% to her postponed dower. So that's the way you approach it. You approach it that it is based on abuse, cruelty, and harm.
Kind of a follow-up question related to the, is it hula? If a wife wants a hula and the husband is refusing, can the wife petition for a judicial divorce? And specifically on the grounds of abuse? Yes,
but now the problem that we have is that all of this would have nothing to do with the secular state authorities, because a judge in the United States does not have the authority to force a religious divorce, except in New York. And you will see the materials that we've posted. I have a lot of articles I've written about this subject, and the rest of the PowerPoint does have some cases about the religious divorce issue and how to get it enforced. But one area that we need some development is there are some progressive imams that she can go to them and ask them to be heard. If he refuses, that's abuse. I mean, the fact of the matter is that she wants a khulu' divorce and willing to walk away, and he's refusing. That is a form of control and abuse, and some imams will understand that and will still grant her a divorce. But she has to shop around and find somebody who's open-minded, willing to do that. Mm-hmm. And in Shi'i circles, it's much more difficult, unfortunately.
I have a question on I have a client who I'm doing a visa petition. He's divorced his wife twice in front of the priest. He remarried during at the time before he remarried his second wife. The wife died. Immigration here in the United States is asking for the divorce decree or death certificate. As he claims under the Islamic law, he doesn't have any of those.
Well, let me try to summarize the question so that I understand the facts. Was this taking place in the United States, the original marriage and divorce, or did it take place in the U.S.?
No, he divorced his wife, he said twice, in front of the priest in Iraq. And
in Iraq?
Later, she died. And then recently, last year, he remarried. He went back to Iraq and remarried the second wife.
Okay. Now, in Iraq and in most of these Arab countries, there's two ways to get divorced. There is what we call the judicial divorce and what we call the unofficial or the informal divorce, both of which have the same effectiveness and validity. In other words, if I go and say to my wife, when we're living in Iraq and our residence in Iraq, you're divorced in front of witnesses. According to the law, I'm divorced, even though I did not petition to the court. Now, what your client, what he has to do is he would petition the Iraqi courts and say, I want to register my former divorce. And what they would do is they would register that divorce, and it would have what we call non-pro-tunc effectiveness from the date of the dissolution. So you can have a judgment from Iraq dated June 19th for a divorce that took place 5 years ago. So it is retroactive to the date of the divorce. So you can have a formal divorce and an informal divorce in most of the Muslim country laws. Registration does not impact validity of the divorce. It may impact the financial rights of the divorce. In other words, the financial rights may not trigger until the registration. But the validity of the dissolution can go back from the date of the pronouncement.
Now, my second question is, did he need to have two witnesses to go to the court and declare that they were present during this statement that he was divorcing his wife in order to do the registration?
What he needs to do is, if he said he did it in front of two witnesses, if those witnesses are still alive or around, yes, he would need that.
But he was not in front of the witnesses?
The husband was not in front of the witnesses?
No. I mean, he's not here, and I'm the one who is doing his petitions. And my question was...
He doesn't need to be there. All he needs to do is retain counsel. The attorney there can enter an appearance and do everything without him being there. All he needs to do is get affidavits from those two witnesses that would confirm that he divorced his wife whatever years it was.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have another question. Abed, can you speak about the differences on fasik divorce? I don't know if I'm saying that right. F-A-S-I-K-H. Divorce in Sunni and Shia communities.
Say that. What kind of? Fasik. Fasik divorce is almost the same thing like the judicial divorce. Fasik literally means an annulment, and it would be just like the tafriq. It's based on grounds, something missing in the contract, that the contract is defective and you want to annul it. Now, the difference in the Shia and the Sunni is the witness requirement in the Shia divorce, no witness requirement in the Sunni divorce. Divorce for women is much more complicated in the Shia setting than in the Sunni setting. And divorce under the North African laws of like Morocco, for example, that follow the Maliki school is much more liberal and easy. But most of the family laws in the Middle East currently are codifications that mix and match between the different schools of law, and most Arab countries now provide for what's called an arbitrary divorce. If a husband just unilaterally divorces for no reason, a woman is entitled up to 3 years of alimony as compensation. So the laws around the Middle East are evolving quite rapidly.
To follow up on this question, I think someone is saying, some Sunni imams say that they cannot make a fasik pronunciation or pronouncement, rather, because they cannot make a fatwa. This is incorrect, right?
This is absolutely incorrect. What it is that the imams want to take the easy route. The easy route is simply, the wife says, I'm waiving everything. If the husband is contesting, they have to make findings of fact. So they need to hear both sides, and they need to take witnesses. So it's harder work. It takes more time. And they're not really equipped to do it. In England, there are more Muslim tribunals that are trying to deal with some of these issues. This is one of the critiques that I have with many imams, that they need to find an easier way to grant Muslim women their religious divorces without having to jump through hoops and make everything so complicated. So it is a problem. It's a major, major problem in our communities, not only in the Muslim communities, but also in the Jewish community as well.
Mm-hmm. And how are restraining orders? How do they interact with Muslim divorces?
Well, I mean, I use if I have a restraining order as grounds that there's harm and that she's entitled to a divorce based on grounds. The imams right now are much more receptive to discussions of abuse than they were, 10 years ago. But they do interplay where once a woman files for a restraining order, families get involved. They put pressure on her to walk away, to withdraw. It really gets very tricky on how that impacts the post-harm dissolution of the marriage. So imams are not very receptive to the restraining orders. I see that some are becoming more understanding, but we have a lot of work still ahead of us, because many only see the abuse as physical and they don't see some of the other, cycle of domestic violence, the control aspect, and the emotional aspect of it. They don't see.
Someone asked earlier if do you take cases from around the country or only in a certain area?
I take cases as a litigator and a lawyer in the New York, New Jersey area, but I take cases as an expert witness all over the country.
Okay, I'm just checking through here to see if there's anything that you haven't already addressed.
Whilst you're looking, Denise, I was just going to say that in the work that I did in a direct service organization, we really put a lot of emphasis on working with the imams and building a relationship with folks in the mosque, so that sometimes they could, the imams then, as they become more progressive, can also influence other imams. So we had one case where the imam granted the unilateral divorce to a woman who was in a very severely abused situation, and we got the imam in Berkeley that we've been working with to call that imam in Arizona and say, can you rescind this unilateral divorce that you just granted, because it really vitiates all her rights. And they did. So I think, building relationships for advocates to build relationships with folks in the mosque is really a critical piece of this work, because as Abid's examples exemplify, there's so many instances where women turn to the imams before they turn to the attorneys.
Absolutely, and the approach we have to take is that the imam in the mosque has to be our partner, not our foe. Because if we make the mosque and the imam our adversary, we're not going to make progress. We need to bring them in to see what we see. I mean, we see something that everyone else has to see, and we just have to work hard. And once they are our partner, I think we will have much sustainable work in favor of women. Now, a practice tip, in every divorce case I handle with Muslims, I never tell my opponent or my adversary that my client wants a religious divorce. I negotiate the case, we fight, we litigate, I do everything until we reach a settlement. When I send the settlement, I include a boilerplate paragraph, which I think I included in my materials, about removal of barriers to remarriage. And only at that last point they would see that I want my religious divorce. Because if you let them know that you want the religious divorce, they're going to extort, they're going to exact extra financial rights, I'm not going to give you the divorce, I'm going to hold on, I don't want a divorce, I still love you. I had this case with a very well-to-do Syrian woman, very wealthy. She married somebody, 4 or 5 years into it, she wants to get a divorce. We fought for years. At the doorsteps of the court, we settled the case. I handwrite in the agreement, the husband will remove barriers to remarriage and grant my client a religious divorce. He said, I will not sign this agreement if that provision is in this agreement. So I told my client that she's going to have a problem. She said, I'm going to domesticate this in Syria, don't worry. She signs the agreement, we remove that provision. 3 years later, she's still litigating in Syria trying to get her religious divorce. He appealed. It went up to the Court of Appeals, and we're fighting. So you have to be careful on how and the timing of getting of raising a religious divorce, because it could be used to extract financial rights from the victim.
There's a question about general resources. Anything that you would recommend that gives further information about Islamic marriages and divorce?
Well, you look at the Peaceful Families Project, the Muslim Marriage Contract Manual that was produced with many of the organizations co-sponsoring today's event. You could also go to, I have a blog. I haven't blogged in a while, but it has the majority of the cases from around the country on Islamic law, and a lot of articles and stuff. It's IslamicLawInAmerica.com. IslamicLawInAmerica.com.
I think amongst the other resources that we can highlight are the ones that have been produced by the Asian Pacific Islander Institute on Domestic Violence. So we have a directory that lists programs, domestic violence programs set up specifically to serve Muslim women. And we also have directory of different forums, Muslim forums that address women's issues, that have, blogs, commentary, that bring together various professional groups to consider some of the issues that affect Muslim women. So, for instance, there's the Pluralism Project at Harvard University, the Sufi Women's Organization, there's the National Association of Muslim Lawyers, Muslim Sexual Ethics. So a whole range of topics that are covered under these forums. So we have a directory of that. And then we also have a bibliography. We actually have two bibliographies. One just covers a short one that lists articles that pertain to gender, domestic violence, and Muslim identities. And then we have a very extensive bibliography. I think it's about like 12 pages, which has lots of different articles by Muslim scholars on the issue of gender, women's rights, domestic and other forms of abuse, and then this connection to how religion can be used to exploit, but then also and cause harm, but can also be used to bolster women's rights and women's social position. So those are the three kind of resources that might be useful. Our website has some data. The Peaceful Families Project has a lot of different information. And the Islamic the Islamic Marriage Contract Resource Guide, which was produced by BWJP, the Institute, and Peaceful Families Project, that has some very it has a good summary of all these issues of the terms, but it also brings together related pieces of useful information. So, for example, the imam at the Adams Center in Virginia has compiled a list of 100 questions for couples planning to get married. And it just asks them a whole bunch of questions about how they plan to, conduct their married life. What do they feel about friends, about sex, about children, the pacing of children, all kinds of issues. So sort of information like that is also folded into some of the resources that you're going to find. And then lastly, also Karama, which is the Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights. They're located in D.C., but they have a lot of materials in English, French, and Arabic. And some of those are the materials that are translated in all those languages too. And they cover both a U.S. and an international spectrum of issues that affect women. And then lastly, I just want to say for technical assistance, so if people have questions and so forth, they can send them to us, to the API Institute, and then we may or may not be able to specifically answer questions, but we can also direct people to folks who can. And Denise, do you want to say what technical assistance Battered Women's Justice Project can provide?
Just specifically on this particular area, obviously we're not, don't have that particular expertise, and it probably would be better to contact API or ABID or some of the organizations that Chick just mentioned. However, in general, in terms of the U.S. system, both civil and criminal law related to domestic violence, we can certainly assist with any related questions of a more general nature.
Yeah, and I just want to add, even in the Islamic Marriage Resource Guide that we produced, there's, we've cited some specific case law that includes many of the cases that Abid, you referenced. We also have a list of experts in the U.S. who are, can, and their areas of expertise. We have a glossary, so many of these terms are mentioned there. And then there is an extensive bibliography, again, that covers, legal issues, gender, domestic violence, and so on. Okay. Any closing, any more questions, or shall we, Abid, do you have some closing remarks?
Well, closing remarks is that everything about dealing with the victim, you really want to take a nice factual history, where she gets married, ask for a copy of her contract. You need to know the context of these issues and how they could be used to abuse her, because she may not even realize it. So a lot of this stuff, to devout Muslim women, they don't even know that they're being abused by this spiritual abuse, by the things that we've discussed. Always, no question is stupid. Always ask. You could always email me. You could send me an email, letter. I would try my best to respond and help anybody out and give you some advice. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and present this to all of you. And I thank the Asian Pacific Islander Institute and all the other groups that have co-sponsored this event and trying to work together as a team to really help and empower women. Thank you.
So thank you. On that note, I want to just end by saying that, of course, our most powerful teachers are often the women that we work with, and they guide us and inspire us because often their clarity or their confusion really serves to bring about the empowerment that we're all trying to work towards. So I want to thank all of you as advocates who work on the ground with women, and then, of course, remind ourselves of how much we owe to the women that we work with. So thank you, everybody.
And lastly, thank you to Abid and Chick for this wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it. And I'll let Carrie close with just a couple more logistical points.
I wanted to remind folks that we did record today, and we'll have this available on our website in about a week. You'll all receive an email in about half an hour that will have the link to our posted recordings. All the materials are still available at that Dropbox and the Google Drive. And that's about it. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Chick and Abed, and thank you, Denise. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. I have to make a plug for the Advocacy Network.
Well, we can send an email.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I think that's it. I thought it was a good presentation.
Well, thank you. You're the lead.
There was a lot of good questions.
I did all the work.
Yeah, a lot of questions, good questions too. So.
Well, I think what we could do
I
is
think
we
people can still hear us, so I just wanted to let you know. So, but I thought it was, because people are still getting off the phone. Okay. So did you think that they were good questions?
I think they were very good questions, and it shows that a lot of these issues that we've discussed today are actually happening with their clients.
Right.
And with the women that they're protecting.
Right.
So, it would be interesting if we can take all the questions and, rework the slides.
Right. Or you can blog about the questions.
And maybe we take a different approach. To tell you the truth, I'm starting to think that maybe the next time we kind of do it in reverse. Do all of the